On my daughter's wedding day, her groom sent me a text message. "We only want important people. If you want to watch the ceremony, check Facebook." I had set aside $19 million to gift them. So on the wedding day, I showed up and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I was 59 years old when my daughter decided I wasn't important enough to witness the most significant day of her life. The message came at 7:30 in the morning, just as I was preparing breakfast and mentally going through my checklist for Emily's wedding day. My phone buzzed, and when I saw her name on the screen, my heart fluttered with that familiar maternal excitement. Maybe she was calling to share some last-minute jitters, or perhaps she needed help with something only a mother could provide. Instead, I found a text message that felt like a physical blow to my chest. "Hi, Mom. Ryan and I decided we want to keep the guest list to only the most important people. If you want to watch the ceremony, we'll be streaming it live on Facebook. Thanks for understanding." I read it once, then twice. My hands started trembling so violently that I nearly dropped the phone. The most important people. Those words echoed in my mind like a cruel mantra. I wasn't one of them. I sat down heavily at my kitchen table, staring at the message until the letters blurred together. The coffee I'd been brewing continued to drip into the pot, filling the silence with its steady rhythm. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart through a window. My first instinct was to call her. Surely this was a mistake. Maybe Ryan had sent it without her knowledge, or perhaps their wedding planner had mixed up some guest management system. But as my finger hovered over her number, reality crept in like cold water, filling my lungs. This wasn't a mistake. This was Emily. I thought about the woman I'd raised, the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and beg me to read her just one more story. Where had that child gone? When had she decided that I, the woman who had given her everything, wasn't worth a seat at her own wedding? The kitchen around me felt smaller suddenly, filled with memories of birthday cakes I'd baked at midnight, school projects I'd helped her complete, and countless conversations about her dreams and fears. I'd supported every decision she'd ever made, even when I disagreed with them, even when she'd chosen Ryan, a man whose arrogance made my skin crawl. I walked to my bedroom and opened the safe where I kept my most important documents. There, wrapped in a silk cloth, was the cashier's check I'd prepared for Emily's wedding gift, $19 million. It represented everything I'd worked for during the past 30 years, the sale of the small manufacturing company I'd built from nothing after my husband died when Emily was only 8. I'd planned this gift carefully. Emily had always struggled financially despite her expensive tastes and constant complaints about money. Ryan worked in real estate, but his income was inconsistent. I wanted to give them security, a foundation they could build their life on. The money would pay off their mortgage, set up college funds for future grandchildren, and provide them with the comfort I'd never had at their age. But now, holding that check in my shaking hands, I felt like the biggest fool in the world. Emily had always been distant, but I'd convinced myself it was just her personality. She was busy with her career, her social circle, her relationship with Ryan. I told myself that all daughters went through phases of pushing their mothers away. I made excuses for her coldness, her short phone calls, her constant cancellations of our lunch dates. The truth was staring me in the face now, harsh and undeniable. To Emily, I wasn't a mother. I was an embarrassment. A reminder of the humble beginnings she desperately wanted to escape. I remembered last Christmas when she'd introduced me to Ryan's parents as Austin, my mom, with the same tone someone might use to identify a piece of furniture. His mother, dripping with jewelry and condescension, had looked me up and down and asked what I did for work, with barely concealed disdain. Emily had quickly changed the subject, but not before I caught the flash of shame in her eyes. She was ashamed of me. The phone rang, startling me out of my memories. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe Emily was calling to apologize, to explain that the text had been sent in error. But the caller ID showed my sister, Margaret's name. "Austin, honey, I just saw Emily's Facebook post about the wedding being family only today. I'm so sorry you're not feeling well enough to attend. Is everything okay?" My throat constricted. family only. She'd told people I was sick rather than admit she'd uninvited her own mother. The humiliation burned through me like acid. "I'm fine, Margaret. Just a misunderstanding." "Oh, good. I was worried." "Well, I'm sure you'll have a wonderful time watching the ceremony online. Technology is amazing these days, isn't it? Almost like being there. Almost like being there, but not actually there. Not holding Emily's hand before she walked down the aisle. Not fixing her veil or telling her she looked beautiful. Not crying tears of joy as my only child married the man she loved. After I hung up, I sat in the growing silence of my house, the home I'd bought and furnished with such care, always hoping Emily would want to visit more often. The guest room I decorated in her favorite colors with fresh flowers I replaced weekly, even though she rarely came. The kitchen where I'd cooked her favorite meals whenever she did grace me with her presence. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. 59 years old, with graying hair I'd been planning to have professionally styled for the wedding. I'd bought a navy blue dress that Emily had approved of during one of our rare shopping trips, calling it appropriate for a mother of the bride. Not beautiful, not elegant, just appropriate. The woman staring back at me looked tired, defeated. She'd spent decades pouring love into a daughter who saw her as an obligation at best, an embarrassment at worst. But as I continued looking at my reflection, something shifted. My jaw tightened, my spine straightened. I wasn't going to spend this day crying into my coffee. I wasn't going to sit at home watching my daughter's wedding through a computer screen like some distant acquaintance. Emily had made her choice, but I still had mine to make. I picked up the check from where I'd laid it on the dresser. $19 million, a fortune that represented my life's work, my sacrifice, my love for a daughter who'd just told me I wasn't important enough to witness her happiness. But maybe it was time Emily learned exactly how unimportant I really was. As I held that check, my mind drifted back to the beginning, to the woman I used to be before I became just Austin, Emily's mom, before I became someone who apparently wasn't important enough for her own daughter's wedding. I was 28 when David died. A heart attack at 32, completely unexpected. One moment we were planning Emily's 9th birthday party, and the next I was a widow with a grief-stricken child and a mountain of debt that David's life insurance barely touched. Emily had cried for weeks, asking when Daddy was coming home, and I'd held her every night while silently falling apart myself. But I couldn't afford to fall apart, not with Emily depending on me. David had been the dreamer in our marriage. He'd invested our savings in a friend's business venture that went nowhere, leaving us with credit card debt and a mortgage we could barely afford. After the funeral, I took inventory of what I had left: a high school diploma, 10 years of experience as a secretary, and a determination that my daughter would never want for anything. I started Austin Manufacturing in the basement of our small house with $5,000 borrowed from my sister and a burning desire to prove that a woman with no college degree could build something lasting. Those first years were brutal. I worked 18-hour days learning everything from accounting to supply chain management through trial and error. Emily spent her afternoons at Margaret's house while I hustled to find clients for my small parts manufacturing business. I missed school plays because I was meeting with potential customers. I missed parent-teacher conferences because I was working night shifts to fulfill orders. I missed birthday parties and sleepovers because every spare moment was invested in building a future for both of us. Emily never complained, but I could see the resentment building. While other mothers were helping with homework, I was calculating profit margins. While other families took vacations, we were reinvesting every dollar back into the business. She started spending more time at friends' houses, especially at the Westbrooks, whose mother didn't work and could drive the kids to the mall or help with school projects. By the time Emily turned 16, Austin Manufacturing was thriving. I'd moved operations into a proper facility and employed 23 people. But success came with its own problems. Emily had discovered that her friends' families had money, old money, inherited money, money that came without the sweat and sacrifice I'd put in to earn ours. "Why can't you be more like Mrs. Westbrook?" she'd asked one day, after I'd missed another school event. She actually cares about what her kids are doing. The words cut deep, because part of me agreed with her. I was so focused on building financial security that I'd missed precious moments I could never get back. But I told myself it would be worth it when Emily was older, when she understood that everything I'd sacrificed was for her. College was when the real distance began. Emily chose a prestigious university 3 states away. Despite having several excellent options closer to home, she wanted to experience independence, she said. But I suspected she wanted to escape the small town where everyone knew her mother as that woman who works all the time. She made friends with wealthy classmates who spent spring breaks in Europe and summers at family estates. Emily would call home less and less frequently, and when she did, our conversations felt stilted and formal. She'd mention parties and events she'd attended, name-dropping acquaintances whose families owned businesses I'd only read about in Forbes magazine. "You should meet Ashley's mom," she'd say. "She's on the board of 3 different charities and still manages to volunteer at the hospital twice a week. She's so involved in everything." The subtext was clear: unlike you who only cares about work. After graduation, Emily moved to the city and landed a job at a marketing firm. She rented an apartment in an expensive neighborhood that I helped her afford, though she never acknowledged the monthly transfers I made to her account. When she brought Ryan home for the first time, I could see immediately why she'd chosen him. Ryan came from the kind of family Emily had always envied. His father owned a chain of luxury hotels. His mother served on museum boards and organized charity galas. They had the social connections and cultural sophistication that Emily craved, and Ryan himself carried that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. He was polite enough to me during that first visit, but I caught the way he looked around our modest living room, taking inventory of our middle-class furniture and decor. When Emily showed him photo albums from her childhood, he'd commented on how quaint everything looked. "Your mom worked so hard to build her little business," he'd said to Emily, and the word little felt like a slap. Austin Manufacturing employed over 60 people by then and generated millions in annual revenue. But to Ryan, it was just a cute hobby compared to his family's hotel empire. Emily had begun editing our relationship for Ryan's benefit. She'd mentioned visiting her family's lake house, the modest cabin I'd bought after years of saving, but wouldn't mention that I'd built it myself one summer, learning carpentry from YouTube videos. She'd talk about family dinner parties, but wouldn't mention that it was usually just her, me and Margaret, eating takeout pizza while I worked on spreadsheets at the kitchen table. The engagement had been another reminder of my place in Emily's new world. They'd gotten engaged at Ryan's family's vineyard in Napa, surrounded by his relatives and family friends. I'd learned about it through a Facebook post, not a phone call. When Emily finally called 2 days later, she was bubbling with excitement about the ring, the venue, the guest list of important people who'd been there to witness the proposal. I wasn't important enough to be included in that moment either. The wedding planning had been 6 months of subtle exclusions. Emily and Ryan worked with his mother to choose everything from the flowers to the menu. I was consulted on nothing, informed of decisions after they'd already been made. When I'd offered to help pay for the reception, Emily had laughed and said Ryan's parents were handling all that. "Besides," she'd added, "you've done enough already. Just relax and enjoy being mother of the bride." But how could I enjoy being mother of the bride when I wasn't even invited to be present for it? Standing in my bedroom now, still holding that check, I understood with painful clarity what had happened to us. Somewhere along the way, Emily had decided that love meant accepting whatever scraps of attention she was willing to give me. That being her mother meant being grateful for brief phone calls and obligatory holiday visits. That supporting her dreams meant staying quietly in the background while she built a life that had no real place for me. I'd enabled it, of course. Every time she'd canceled plans, I'd understood. Every time she'd made excuses for not visiting, I'd accommodated her. Every time she'd made me feel small or unimportant, I'd swallowed my hurt and told myself she was just busy, just stressed, just going through a phase. But this wasn't a phase. This was who Emily had chosen to become, and I was finally seeing it clearly. The check felt heavier in my hands now, weighted with 30 years of sacrifice and love that had never been valued. I'd sold my company to give Emily this money, liquidating everything I'd built to secure her future. The buyer had been surprised when I'd insisted on such a quick sale, accepting less than market value to have cash in hand for the wedding. I'd planned to present it to her today with tears in my eyes, telling her how proud I was and how much I wanted her to be happy. I'd imagined her face lighting up with joy and gratitude. I'd imagined maybe finally feeling like I mattered to her. Instead, I was standing alone in my bedroom, uninvited to my own daughter's wedding, holding $19 million that suddenly felt like the loneliest fortune in the world. But as I looked at myself again in that mirror, I realized something had changed. The defeated woman from an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone who'd remembered what it felt like to be strong, to make hard decisions, to refuse to accept being treated as less than I was worth. Emily wanted to keep her wedding guest list limited to only the most important people. Fine. But she was about to learn exactly how important some people could be. I spent the next hour in a strange kind of clarity that I hadn't felt in years. It was as if Emily's cruel message had burned away all the self-doubt and desperate hope that had clouded my judgment for so long. For the first time in decades, I wasn't trying to figure out how to make myself more palatable to my daughter. Instead, I was planning how to show her exactly what she'd thrown away. I started with my appearance. The navy blue dress Emily had deemed appropriate went back into the closet. Instead, I chose a charcoal gray suit I'd bought for important business meetings, but had never worn anywhere Emily might see it. It was elegant, expensive, and spoke of success in a way that couldn't be ignored. I paired it with the pearl necklace David had given me for our 10th anniversary, the only valuable jewelry I owned that Emily had never asked to borrow. At the salon, I asked Maria to style my hair differently than usual, not the conservative, matronly look I'd maintained for years, but something sophisticated and confident. As she worked, I watched myself transform in the mirror. The tired, apologetic woman from this morning was disappearing, replaced by someone who looked like she belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Austin," Maria said as she finished. "Special occasion?" "You could say that," I replied, studying my reflection. "I'm going to a wedding where I wasn't invited." Maria's eyebrows shot up, but she was too professional to ask for details. I paid her and left, feeling lighter with each step. The drive to the wedding venue gave me time to think about what I was really doing. I wasn't going there to make a scene or embarrass Emily in front of her guests. I wasn't even going there to be vindictive, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt imagining her shock when she saw me. No, I was going because I needed to see this moment for myself. I needed to witness what Emily considered more important than her own mother. I needed to understand who my daughter had become when she thought I wasn't watching. The venue was exactly what I'd expected. An exclusive country club with manicured gardens and a ballroom that probably cost more to rent for one day than most people made in a year. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms directed expensive cars toward the parking area. I could see why Emily had chosen this place. It screamed prestige and exclusivity, everything she'd always craved. I parked across the street at a small cafe and walked to a spot where I could observe the guests arriving. The women wore designer dresses and carried purses that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The men looked comfortable in their expensive suits, moving with the casual confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. These were Emily's important people. This was the world she'd chosen over me. I watched as Ryan's parents arrived in a black Mercedes, his mother dripping with diamonds, and his father looking every inch the successful hotel magnate. They were greeted by name by the venue staff, clearly recognized as VIPs. A photographer captured their arrival, and I realized this wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a social event, a networking opportunity, a chance for Emily to cement her place in high society. More guests streamed in, and I recognized some faces from Emily's social media posts. College friends who'd married well, work colleagues from prestigious firms, Ryan's business associates. Not one person I knew, not one person who'd known Emily as a child or had any connection to the life we'd built together. It was as if the first 28 years of Emily's life had been erased, replaced by this sanitized version where she'd sprung fully formed into Ryan's world without any inconvenient history of struggle or sacrifice. Then I saw her. Emily emerged from a white limousine looking absolutely radiant. Her dress was stunning, clearly custom-made, and worth more than most people's cars. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, and for a moment, my heart swelled with pride despite everything. She was my daughter. I had raised this beautiful, successful woman. I had worked 18-hour days and sacrificed everything to give her the opportunities that had led to this moment. But as I watched her pose for photos with Ryan and his family, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. She kept glancing around nervously, scanning the crowd as if she was looking for someone. At one point, she whispered something to Ryan, and he pulled out his phone, frowning as he typed. They were looking for me. Despite everything, despite the cruel message and the deliberate exclusion, some part of Emily had expected me to show up. Some part of her had counted on her mother's unconditional love overriding her hurt feelings. She'd assumed I would swallow this humiliation the way I'd swallowed all the others, that I would find a way to be present for her big day, even after being told I wasn't wanted. The realization filled me with a mixture of sadness and anger. She'd wanted to have it both ways, to exclude me publicly while still benefiting from my presence privately, to keep me at arm's length while still counting on my support. I watched as the guests moved toward the garden where the ceremony would take place. Emily continued to scan the crowd, her smile becoming more strained as she realized I truly wasn't there. She said something to Ryan's mother, who looked around with confusion. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to actually respect their wishes and stay away. From my vantage point across the street, I could see the wedding ceremony clearly. The officiant took his place at the altar, decorated with white roses and baby's breath. A string quartet began playing, and the guests settled into their chairs. I recognized the music, Canon in D, the same piece I'd played at my own wedding 31 years ago. Ryan took his position at the altar, handsome in his tailored tuxedo. His groomsmen flanked him, all looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine. The bridesmaids began their procession down the aisle in their pale pink dresses, each one perfectly styled and smiling. And then it was time for Emily. She appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant and nervous, carrying a bouquet of white peonies and roses. The guests rose to their feet, and even from across the street, I could see the tears in many eyes. She looked beautiful, ethereal, everything a bride should be. But she was walking alone. I'd assumed Ryan's father, or perhaps his uncle, would escort her down the aisle, but Emily had chosen to walk by herself. At first, I thought it was a modern choice, a statement of independence. Then I realized the truth was more complicated. She'd planned for me to walk her down the aisle. The thought hit me like a physical blow. Even after sending that cruel message, even after telling me I wasn't important enough to attend, Emily had still expected me to be there for the most significant moment of the ceremony. She'd counted on my love being stronger than my pride, on my maternal instincts overriding my hurt feelings. As she walked down the aisle alone, I could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept glancing toward the back of the venue as if I might still appear. The guests seemed puzzled by her solo walk, whispering among themselves about where the mother of the bride might be. Brian's expression was tense as Emily reached the altar. He leaned toward her and whispered something, and she shook her head slightly, her smile never wavering, but her eyes betraying her distress. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, about the joining of two families and the beginning of a new chapter. Ryan and Emily exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other through all of life's challenges. But I wasn't there to witness any of it firsthand. I was watching my daughter's wedding from across the street like a stranger, like someone who had no connection to the bride at all. As the ceremony concluded and Emily and Ryan kissed as husband and wife, the guests erupted in applause and cheers. Rice and rose petals filled the air as the happy couple walked back down the aisle together. They were beaming, radiant with joy and love. Yet I could see the strain around Emily's eyes, the way she kept looking past the guests toward the venue entrance. Even in her moment of triumph, she was searching for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emily had gotten exactly what she'd asked for, a wedding attended only by the most important people in her life. But in achieving that goal, she'd discovered what it felt like to have the one person who'd loved her unconditionally simply absent. As the guests moved toward the reception, I remained in my spot across the street. I had the check in my purse, $19 million that could change their lives forever. I could still walk over there, present it with a smile, and pretend the morning's message had never happened. I could still play the role of the grateful, accommodating mother who was just happy to be included in any way. But I didn't move. Instead, I watched my daughter begin her new life, surrounded by people who valued her for what she could do for them, not for who she was. People who would support her as long as she remained useful to their social climbing or business networking. Emily had made her choice about who was important to her. Now it was time for me to make mine. The reception was in full swing when I finally decided to act. Through the large windows of the country club, I could see the celebration unfolding exactly as Emily had envisioned. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and elaborate floral arrangements. Guests mingled with champagne glasses, their laughter and conversation creating the perfect soundtrack for a fairy tale wedding. But fairy tales, I'd learned, often left out the inconvenient truths. I crossed the street slowly, my heels clicking against the pavement with each deliberate step. The valet attendants looked confused as I approached. I clearly didn't belong to their usual clientele, yet there was something about my presence that commanded respect. My business years had taught me how to carry myself with authority, and that skill was serving me well now. "Ma'am, are you here for the Hartwell-Mitchell reception?" one young man asked politely. "I am," I replied, not bothering to explain that Mitchell was my maiden name, the one I'd reclaimed after David's death, and built my company under. Emily had chosen to use Ryan's surname for the wedding, erasing even that connection to our family history. I entered the country club with the confidence of someone who belonged there. The marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, and oil paintings of long-dead rich men watched from gilded frames. This was Emily's world now, and I had to admit, it was impressive. The reception hall buzzed with energy. I positioned myself near the entrance where I could observe without immediately being noticed. Emily and Ryan were making their rounds, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. She looked radiant, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept scanning the room. She was still looking for me. Austin Mitchell? I turned to find a woman in an expensive burgundy dress approaching me with surprise written across her face. It took me a moment to recognize Diane Westbrook, the mother of Emily's childhood friend, the woman whose perfect homemaker lifestyle Emily had always held up as the standard I'd failed to meet. "Diane, hello," I said evenly. "I'm so surprised to see you here. Emily told everyone you weren't feeling well and couldn't make it." Diane's eyes swept over my appearance, taking in the expensive suit and professional styling. There was confusion in her expression, as if she was trying to reconcile this version of me with whatever story Emily had told. "I'm feeling much better now," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Well, you look wonderful. I hardly recognized you. You seem so different." She paused, clearly fishing for information. "Emily mentioned you'd been having some health issues." The lie stung, but it didn't surprise me. Of course, Emily had created a cover story that made her look sympathetic rather than cruel. The sick mother narrative was so much better than the truth that she'd simply decided I wasn't important enough to include. "My health is excellent," I said firmly. "Thank you for your concern." Diane looked uncomfortable, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. "Well, I should go congratulate the happy couple. I'm sure Emily will be thrilled to see you here after all." As she walked away, I noticed several other guests glancing in my direction with curious expressions. Word was spreading that the mother of the bride had arrived unexpectedly. I could practically see the whispered conversations beginning. I thought she was sick. Emily said she couldn't come. Why didn't she mention her mother was here? The questions would be reaching Emily soon enough. I made my way closer to where she and Ryan were holding court near the head table. Emily was in the middle of thanking Ryan's business partner for a generous wedding gift when she caught sight of me over his shoulder. The color drained from her face so quickly, I thought she might faint. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, time seemed frozen. I saw shock, fear, and something that might have been relief flicker across her features. Then reality set in, and her expression shifted to panic. She whispered something urgent to Ryan, who followed her gaze to where I stood. His face went through its own transformation, confusion, recognition, and then what I could only describe as terror. He understood immediately that my presence here meant something significant, something that could disrupt their perfect day. I remained perfectly still, letting them process the implications. I wasn't causing a scene or drawing attention to myself. I was simply existing in their space, uninvited but undeniably present. Emily excused herself from her conversation and began making her way toward me, Ryan close behind. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to handle this situation without creating a spectacle. She'd spent so much effort crafting the perfect wedding, and now the mother she'd excluded was threatening to unravel her carefully constructed narrative. "Mom," she said when she reached me, her voice carefully controlled but her eyes wide with anxiety. "What are you doing here? You got my message, right?" "I did," I replied calmly. "You wanted to keep the guest list limited to only the most important people. I completely understand." Ryan stepped forward, his charm turned up to maximum wattage, but his nervousness evident in the slight tremor of his voice. "Mrs. Mitchell, what a wonderful surprise. Emily mentioned you weren't feeling well. I'm so glad you recovered in time to make it." So he was going to pretend this had been a misunderstanding, that my exclusion had been based on illness rather than Emily's deliberate choice. It was a good strategy, actually. It allowed everyone to save face while avoiding the truth about what had really happened. "I'm feeling perfectly fine," I said, my gaze moving between them. "In fact, I feel better than I have in years." Emily's smile was becoming more strained by the second. "That's wonderful, Mom. I'm so glad you're here." The words sounded forced, as if she were reciting lines from a script she hadn't had time to rehearse properly. "Are you?" I asked quietly. "Because your message this morning suggested otherwise." The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Emily glanced around nervously, aware that guests were beginning to notice our conversation. A few were moving closer, drawn by the obvious tension despite our civilized tones. "Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," Ryan suggested, his smile never wavering but his eyes sharp with warning. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," so I replied. "After all, we wouldn't want to take time away from your important guests." Emily flinched at the emphasis I placed on the word important. She understood that I was throwing her own language back at her, making her confront the cruelty of what she'd said. "Mom, please," she whispered, her composure starting to crack. "This is my wedding day. Can't we just pretend everything is fine?" Pretend. That single word encapsulated everything wrong with our relationship. Emily wanted me to pretend her message hadn't hurt me, pretend I hadn't been excluded from the most important day of her life, pretend I was grateful for the scraps of attention she was willing to give me now that her plan had backfired. "I've done a lot of pretending over the years," I said softly. "I pretended it didn't hurt when you stopped calling. I pretended I understood when you canceled our plans repeatedly. I pretended it was normal for a daughter to be embarrassed by her own mother." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but whether they were from guilt or frustration, I couldn't tell. "Mom, you're being dramatic. People are staring." "Are they?" I glanced around at the elegantly dressed guests who were indeed watching our little drama unfold. "How embarrassing for you, having your mother cause a scene at your perfect wedding." Ryan stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Emily loves you very much. She talks about you all the time." The lie was so blatant it was almost amusing. "Does she? What does she say?" He faltered, clearly unprepared for the direct question. Emily jumped in to save him, her voice rising slightly with desperation. "Mom, you're making this into something it's not. The message this morning was just about space limitations. The venue has capacity restrictions, and we had to make difficult choices." "Interesting," I said, reaching into my purse. "Because I happen to know this venue can accommodate up to 300 guests. And from what I can see, you have perhaps 150 people here." Emily's face went white. She hadn't expected me to fact-check her lies. I pulled out the check I'd been carrying all day and held it so they could both see the amount. $19 million, written in my careful handwriting and signed with my name. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Ryan's eyes went wide, and he actually took a step backward, as if the check were radioactive. Emily gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat. "Mom, what is that?" she whispered. "Your wedding gift," I replied calmly. "I sold my company to give you and Ryan a secure financial foundation for your marriage. I wanted to surprise you with it today." Ryan was staring at the check like a drowning man stares at a life preserver. I could practically see dollar signs reflecting in his eyes. Emily looked between the check and my face, her expression cycling through confusion, hope, and growing fear. $19 million, I continued conversationally. "More than enough to pay off your mortgage, set up college funds for your children, maybe buy a vacation home. The kind of gift that comes from someone who loves you unconditionally." "Mom," Emily started, her voice thick with tears. "I didn't know. I never expected—" "No," I agreed. "You didn't expect it. Just like you didn't expect me to actually respect your wishes and stay away from your wedding." Ryan found his voice, though it came out hoarse with emotion. "Mrs. Mitchell, I owe you an apology. Emily and I both do. We made a terrible mistake." "Did you?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you got exactly what you wanted. A wedding attended only by the most important people." I folded the check carefully and put it back in my purse. Both Emily and Ryan watched it disappear with expressions of pure panic. "The question now," I said quietly, "is what you're willing to do to prove that assessment was wrong." The silence that followed my question stretched between us like a chasm. Emily and Ryan stood frozen, their perfect wedding celebration continuing around us while their world quietly collapsed. Other guests were beginning to notice something was wrong. The bride's tears, the groom's pale complexion, the strange intensity of their conversation with a woman most of them had never seen before. "Mom, please," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "Tell me what you want. Tell me how to fix this." I looked at my daughter, this beautiful, accomplished woman who had just asked me what she needed to do to earn $19 million, and felt a deep sadness settle in my chest. Even now, faced with the consequences of her cruelty, Emily was thinking in terms of transactions rather than relationships. "What I want," I said slowly, "is for you to understand what you threw away this morning." Ryan stepped forward, his practiced charm replaced by desperate sincerity. "Mrs. Mitchell, I take full responsibility for this. The message Emily sent, that was my idea. I thought it would be better to keep things small and intimate. I never meant to hurt you." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that I almost admired his technique. He was trying to shield Emily, to take the blame himself, and position her as an innocent victim of his poor judgment. It might have worked if I hadn't seen the truth in Emily's eyes when she'd looked at me across the reception hall. "How thoughtful of you to sacrifice yourself for Emily's sake," I replied. "But we both know that's not what happened, don't we?" Emily's tears were flowing freely now, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was stressed about the wedding, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I never meant for you to feel unwanted." "But I was unwanted," I said simply. "That's exactly what you meant, Emily. You wanted a wedding that would impress Ryan's family and friends. You wanted to present yourself as someone who belonged in their world. And I was a reminder of everything you wanted to leave behind." "That's not true," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I reached into my purse again, not for the check this time, but for a small envelope I'd prepared during my hour of clarity that morning. Inside were copies of bank statements showing the monthly transfers I'd been making to Emily's account for the past 5 years. Payments for her rent, her car, her credit cards, her student loans. Nearly $200,000 in total support that she'd never acknowledged or thanked me for. "Do you remember asking me for help with your student loan payments 3 years ago?" I asked, handing her the envelope. "You said you were drowning in debt and didn't know what to do. So I took over the payments without telling you, because I didn't want you to feel guilty or obligated." Emily opened the envelope with shaking hands, scanning the documents inside. Her face grew paler with each statement. "Or, what about when your car broke down last year and you needed a new transmission? You mentioned it casually during one of our brief phone calls, and the next day I had my mechanic call you to say he'd handle everything. You thought it was warranty work." "Mom," Emily breathed, staring at the papers. "I've been subsidizing your lifestyle for years, Emily, not because you asked me to, but because I wanted you to be comfortable and secure. Because I loved you and wanted to support your dreams, even when those dreams didn't include me." Ryan was looking at the bank statements over Emily's shoulder, his expression shifting from desperation to calculation. I could see him adding up the numbers, realizing exactly how much money had been flowing from my accounts to theirs without his knowledge. "But here's what I've realized today," I continued. "Love shouldn't require buying someone's affection. Support shouldn't mean accepting disrespect in return, and being a mother doesn't mean I have to tolerate being treated as an embarrassment." I took the envelope back from Emily's trembling hands and tucked it away. "So to answer your question about what I want you both to understand that actions have consequences." "What does that mean?" Ryan asked, though I suspected he already knew. I pulled out a second envelope, this one containing documents I'd prepared during my drive to the venue. "It means I've made some decisions about how to handle my estate planning." Emily's eyes widened in panic. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that the woman who sold her life's work to give her daughter a wedding gift no longer exists. She died this morning when she received a text message telling her she wasn't important enough to witness her only child's marriage." The wedding reception continued around us, but our small group had created a bubble of tension that was beginning to draw more attention. I could see Ryan's mother making her way toward us, her expression curious and concerned. "The $19 million I plan to give you will be going elsewhere," I said calmly. "I've already spoken with my attorney about establishing a scholarship fund for single mothers who want to start their own businesses, women who understand what it means to sacrifice everything for their children, even when those children grow up to be ashamed of them." Emily let out a sob that was loud enough to cause several nearby guests to turn and stare. "Mom, please don't do this. I know I made a mistake, but I can't lose you over this." "You can't lose me," I repeated. "Emily, you threw me away this morning like yesterday's newspaper. You don't get to decide now that you want to keep me just because there's money involved." Ryan's mother had reached us now, her perfectly styled gray hair and diamond earrings marking her as the society matron she was. "Is everything all right here? Emily, darling, you look upset." "Mrs. Hartwell," I said before Emily could respond, "I'm Austin Mitchell, Emily's mother. I was just congratulating the happy couple on their beautiful wedding." Ryan's mother looked confused. "Oh, I thought you were unable to attend due to illness. How wonderful that you recovered in time." "Yes," I said with a smile that felt like broken glass. "It's amazing how quickly one can recover from disappointment." Emily was openly crying now, drawing stares from across the ballroom. Her perfect wedding was becoming a spectacle, exactly what she'd been trying to avoid by excluding me in the first place. "I think perhaps we should step outside for some air," Ryan's mother suggested diplomatically, clearly sensing the undercurrents, even if she didn't understand them. "Actually, I think it's time for me to leave," I said. "I've seen everything I came here to see." "Mom, wait," Emily called out desperately. "Please don't go. We can talk about this. We can work it out." I paused and looked at her one final time. This daughter I'd loved and sacrificed for and been endlessly proud of despite everything. She looked beautiful, even with tears streaming down her face, but she also looked like a stranger. "Emily, I want you to remember this moment," I said quietly. "Remember what it feels like to watch someone you love walk away from you. Remember the panic and desperation you're feeling right now, because that's exactly how I felt this morning when I realized my own daughter didn't want me at the most important day of her life." "But I do want you," she whispered. "I've always wanted you. I was just scared that you wouldn't fit in, that people would judge you, that it would be awkward. Scared that people would judge me, I repeated. Your mother, the woman who built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. The woman who worked 18-hour days to give you every opportunity you ever had. Emily flinched as if I'd slapped her. Do you know what the saddest part is? I continued. It's not that you were ashamed of me. It's that you never gave me the chance to show these people who I really am. You decided I was an embarrassment, without ever letting me prove otherwise. I turned to Ryan, who had been silent during this exchange, his face cycling through various shades of panic and regret. And you, I said to him, you encourage this. You let my daughter believe that cutting me out of her life would somehow elevate her status in your world. You never bothered to learn anything about me or what I'd accomplished. You just assumed I wasn't good enough for your family. Mrs. Mitchell, he started, but I held up a hand to stop him. I hope you both get everything you wanted from this marriage, I said. But you'll be getting it without my financial support, my emotional availability, or my presence in your lives. I walked away then, moving through the crowd of wedding guests with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Emily calling my name, her voice breaking with each syllable. I didn't turn around. As I reached the exit, I realized that I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of constantly trying to earn my daughter's love had been lifted from my shoulders. The exhausting cycle of giving and hoping and being disappointed was finally broken. I had given Emily exactly what she'd asked for, a life where she didn't have to worry about her mother embarrassing her. Now she would have to live with the consequences of that choice. 6 months had passed since Emily's wedding, and I was sitting in my lawyer's office finalizing the paperwork for the Austin Mitchell Foundation for Single Mothers. The $19 million that had once been intended as a wedding gift was now funding scholarships, business grants, and mentorship programs for women who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. The first scholarship recipients have been selected, David Chen, my attorney, told me as he slid a folder across his mahogany desk. 12 women from across the country. Their stories are remarkable. I opened the folder and read through the applications. Sarah, a 34-year-old single mother who wanted to start a catering business but couldn't afford commercial kitchen certification. Maria, who had an idea for an app to help working mothers coordinate childcare but needed capital for development. Jennifer, a widow with 3 children who dreamed of opening a bookstore in her small town. Each story resonated with me because I recognized myself in these women, the determination, the sacrifice, the quiet strength that comes from having no choice but to succeed. There's something else, David said, his tone becoming more serious. I've received multiple calls from Emily. She wants to know if there's any way to contest the foundation or have the money redirected back to her. I wasn't surprised. Emily had been trying to reach me ever since the wedding. Through phone calls I didn't answer, letters I returned unopened, and messages delivered through Margaret and other family members. Each attempt had become more desperate as she realized I truly meant what I'd said about cutting contact. What did you tell her? I asked. That the foundation was legally established and the money irrevocably transferred. There's nothing she can contest. He paused. She also asked about your will. Keek, a bitter smile crossed my lips. Of course she had. Emily was probably wondering if she'd lost her inheritance along with her wedding gift. I've already made those changes, I said. Everything will go to the foundation when I die. Emily made it clear that she doesn't need my support, so she won't be getting it. David nodded, making notes in his file. She seemed quite distressed on the phone. Are you certain you don't want to reconsider? Perhaps give her another chance? I thought about his question as I walked home through the tree-lined streets of my neighborhood. 6 months ago, I might have wavered. The old Austin would have found excuses for Emily's behavior, would have convinced herself that cutting off her only daughter was too harsh a punishment for one moment of cruelty. But I wasn't the same woman who had been devastated by that text message on her daughter's wedding morning. The past 6 months had been a journey of rediscovering who I was beyond my role as Emily's mother. I'd started traveling, something I'd never had time for during my business-building years or during Emily's childhood when every spare dollar went toward her needs. I'd visited Italy, spent 3 weeks exploring art museums and vineyards. I'd taken a cruise through the Caribbean, making friends with other solo travelers who shared my newfound appreciation for independence. More importantly, I'd begun building relationships with people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. The women in my foundation saw me as a mentor and inspiration, not as an ATM or a source of embarrassment. The volunteers I worked with appreciated my business experience and treated my opinions with respect. For the first time in decades, I felt truly appreciated. My phone rang as I entered my house. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and I debated whether to answer. My sister had been serving as an unwilling intermediary between Emily and me, passing along messages I didn't want to hear. "Austin, thank goodness you picked up," Margaret said when I finally answered. "Emily is here with me, and she's in a terrible state. She's been crying for hours." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, genuinely meaning it. I didn't want Emily to suffer, but I also couldn't fix her pain without sacrificing my own peace. "She wants to talk to you. She says she'll do anything to make this right. She's even offered to pay back all the money you spent supporting her over the years." I almost laughed at that. Emily didn't have enough money to pay me back, and we both knew it. Her marketing job paid well, but not well enough to cover 5 years of rent assistance, car repairs, student loans, and credit card payments. "Margaret, I need you to understand something," I said, settling into my favorite armchair. "This isn't about money. It was never about money. This is about respect and dignity, and the fact that Emily decided I wasn't worthy of either. But she was just stressed about the wedding. People make mistakes when they're under pressure." "So some mistakes can be forgiven," I agreed, "but some reveal truths that can't be ignored. Emily didn't exclude me because she was stressed. She excluded me because she was ashamed of me. That's not something that changes just because she regrets the consequences." I could hear Emily sobbing in the background, and Margaret's voice became pleading. "Austin, she's learned her lesson. Isn't that enough? She knows she made a terrible mistake." "Has she?" I asked. "Because, from what I understand, she spent the past 6 months trying to get my money back, rather than examining why she treated me so badly in the first place." There was a long silence. Margaret couldn't argue with that because we both knew it was true. "I want you to give Emily a message from me," I continued. "Tell her that I hope she has a happy marriage and a successful life. Tell her that I don't hate her and I don't wish her ill. But also tell her that some doors, once closed, don't open again." "Austin, I have to go, Margaret. I have a foundation meeting this evening." I hung up before she could protest further. Through my living room window, I could see my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, working in her garden. She was a widow like me, and we'd become close friends over the past few months. She'd invited me to join her book club, where I'd discovered a love for historical fiction that I'd never had time to explore before. My calendar was fuller now than it had been in years, but filled with activities I chose rather than obligations I felt trapped by. I had dinner plans with Sarah, one of my scholarship recipients, who wanted to update me on her catering business progress. Tomorrow I was meeting with the foundation board to discuss expanding our program to include child care grants. I was building a new life, one where my worth wasn't constantly questioned and my presence wasn't seen as a burden to be managed. The phone rang again, and this time Emily's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, remembering all the times I'd answered her calls with desperate hope that this time would be different, that this time she would sound genuinely happy to talk to me. I let it go to voicemail. Later that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I finally listened to the message she'd left. "Mom, it's me. I know you probably won't listen to this, but I have to try. I've been thinking about what you said at the wedding, about how I made you feel. You were right about everything. I was ashamed of our simple life when I was growing up. I was embarrassed that you worked all the time instead of volunteering at school like other moms. I wanted to fit in with Ryan's family so badly that I convinced myself you wouldn't belong there." Her voice broke, and I could hear her struggling to continue. "But I was wrong about everything. Ryan's mother asked me last week why I never talk about you, why I never mention your business or your accomplishments. She said she would have loved to meet the woman who built a company from nothing while raising a child alone. She said it sounded inspiring. There was a long pause filled with shaky breathing. I realize now that I spent so many years trying to become someone worthy of Ryan's world that I forgot to appreciate the amazing woman who made it all possible. I threw away the most important relationship in my life because I was too stupid and shallow to see how lucky I was to be your daughter. More silence. Then her voice came back smaller and more broken than before. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that losing you has been the worst consequence of my terrible choices. Worse than losing the money, worse than the embarrassment at the wedding, worse than anything. I finally understand what you meant when you said I threw you away, like yesterday's newspaper. That's exactly what I did, and I've regretted it every single day since. The message ended with Emily's quiet sobbing, and then the line went dead. I sat in my bedroom for a long time, holding the phone and feeling the familiar tug of maternal love pulling at my heart. Part of me wanted to call her back, to tell her that her apology meant everything to me, to try once more to rebuild our relationship. But I'd learned something important over the past 6 months. Love without respect is just another form of suffering. Emily might genuinely regret her choices, but regret didn't erase the fundamental truth that she'd found me embarrassing enough to exclude from the most important day of her life. I deleted the voicemail and plugged my phone into its charger. The next morning, I woke up feeling peaceful. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom windows, and I could hear birds singing in the oak tree outside. I had a full day ahead of me, a foundation meeting, lunch with a potential new board member, and dinner with friends from my book club. I was finally living the life I'd always been too busy sacrificing for Emily to create for myself. It was a life filled with purpose, friendship, and genuine appreciation. It was a life where I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells, afraid that one wrong move would cost me someone's love. As I made coffee and planned my day, I realized that Emily's wedding had been a gift after all. Not the gift I'd intended to give, but the gift I'd needed to receive. The gift of finally understanding my own worth and refusing to accept anything less than the respect I deserved. I was 59 years old, and for the first time in decades, I was truly free.